days ago, walking home with a cart full of groceries, and call it divine intervention, if you will, but for some strange reason, at the last moment, we decided to take this alleyway home. We're in the dead of winter and the alleys are quite icy, so I'm not quite sure what made us decide to take this alleyway home, but we did. It's literally just two rows of garages facing each other, and the rest is just concrete. So I noticed in front of one of the garages was a ball of fur. So of course I went over to have a closer look, and I saw that it was a raccoon, and it was all curled up and they were still breathing. So I knew that wasn't right because, first of all, raccoons are not usually out in the middle of the afternoon, never mind all curled up in a ball like that in like freezing cold weather. So rushed home. I was already on my phone checking who to call. First, I called the city number. The person I spoke to informed me that animal services usually euthanizes almost all of the animals that they pick up. And I called the local wildlife center in case there's a chance to rehabilitate it if it's injured or whatever. While I was speaking to the woman at the wildlife center, she informed me that her colleague was in the city picking up another injured raccoon, and if I could please help them assess this raccoon that I came across. The reason she was asking me to help assess this was because she thought it was most likely a case of distemper, which is a virus that is unfortunately rampant amongst the wildlife in the city. So if the raccoon I found did have distemper, that would mean they would not be able to take it in the van with the other raccoon that the wildlife center was picking up because it's so contagious. So she asked me to grab something to make noise with. I grabbed this metal dustpan I just had lying around, stuck it in a bag, got my coat back on, ran up the alley to where the raccoon was, and she asked me to make noise near the raccoon to see if there was any reaction, which I did, and the raccoon didn't move at all. While we were waiting for her colleague to arrive in the van, a woman pulled up in the alley in her car, about to park in one of the garages a couple of doors over. She rolled her window down and asked if I was dealing with this raccoon, and I said yes. And I was still on the phone with the wildlife center, and she asked if the neighbor possibly had a broom. So I asked her, and she parked her car and came out with a broom, and we gently touched the raccoon's back with the bristle side, and the raccoon sort of sat up, gave a little hiss, but then went right back to being curled up. And the wildlife center says, yeah, normally they would go more crazy. This was probably most likely a case of distemper. So the neighbor woman then said to me, oh, my husband saw the raccoon there a couple of days ago. And I just said, a couple of days ago? And I guess the look I gave her, she then followed up with, oh, I guess he just thought it was resting and would be on its way. And I just thought, but you didn't come back to check? You didn't come to make sure? You just left it there? The wildlife center van, we could see it pulling up through the alleyway, and she parked to the side, and I got off the phone with her colleague, and now the second wildlife center person came out to have a look, and she set up a big carrier crate. She got a net, got the raccoon in the net, and because they had asked me if I was able to check its eyes for discharge, but it was all curled up. I wasn't able to see it. Even when it hissed, it was very quick, and I didn't have a chance to actually look closely at its eyes. But when she had it in the net and was trying to get it into the carrier, she was able to get a look at it, and she says, oh yeah, his eyes are very gloopy, and yeah, for sure this raccoon has distemper. So she got it into this carrier, and I was relieved because the carrier had a nice blanket folded inside of it. It was quite cold, so she put another blanket on top of the whole thing as well to block the elements. And then while this was going on, another car pulled out of the garage literally right next to where this raccoon had been for a couple of days apparently. And the woman drove out with her kids, and I just thought, oh, okay, so here's another neighbor who obviously saw this because she's right next door to it, and she must have been coming and going. And another person who did nothing. It's really, really hard not to judge. So because the Wildlife Center assessed that this raccoon did in fact have distemper and that she could not take it. They asked if I could then call the city to come pick it up and they would humanely euthanize the raccoon because distemper is a very painful, awful disease in which the animals suffer very much. So I thanked her. She taped a little note on top of the carrier that someone was coming to pick them up. And I went home and I informed the city that there was this raccoon and it had already been assessed by, the wildlife center and that it had distemper. And the city worker said that animal services, it could take them up to 2 hours before they would be able to pick the raccoon up. So in the meantime, I cut up some slices of apple that I had and I went back to where the raccoon was again because I thought, well, in the meantime, I may as well leave it some food just in case it's hungry because it's been lying there for 2 days with no food or water. So I just stuck the apple bits in through the bit of the holes that were in the lid of this carrier. And I don't know if they could eat it or not, but I just thought, well, just in case. Then I went home. When the 2 hours were almost up, I got a call from the animal services guy, and he asked if I could describe exactly where the raccoon was. He was parked just across the street, and I said, I want to come with you, and I'll show you where it is. And I just wanted to have one more look myself, just to 100% make sure that that was what was happening with this raccoon before it was euthanized. I showed him where the carrier was. The whole walk up, I was asking him, can you please make sure you assess this raccoon again to make sure it absolutely is distemper and that it's not just an injury from being hit by a car or something. His life could be spared somehow. And when we got to the carrier, he lifted the blanket and he sort of gave the raccoon a little shake, and the raccoon sort of looked up for a second. It was dark now, and he showed me with the flashlight, his eyes, and they were quite gloopy and lots of discharge, and he showed me all the dried up discharge around its nose and the fact that it had just been lying there. He said that for sure this is distemper, so I said, okay, I understand. He had his own little wire cages with him. So I said, well, maybe just could you leave the raccoon in there because he was all on a blanket, all curled up. It's cozier, And so he said, yes, I can just leave him in there. And he took the raccoon in the carrier that he was already in. And he went on his way, and I went home and I had a cry. Just wanted to say that the people at the wildlife center and the animal services city worker were all very kind and professional, and I did learn quite a lot from them in that short amount of time. Animal services guy told me that even though distemper is so rampant in the wildlife, they don't do anything about it to contain it because distemper does not affect humans. So in the way that they vaccinate animals for rabies, because humans can get rabies, he told me they put, the vaccine in food and then leave food out for the animals, and that's how they sort of keep the animals from getting rabies. But because humans cannot catch distemper, only other animals and many animals can catch distemper, not just raccoons. It can squirrels, coyotes, even feral cats. They were saying it's so contagious if one animal with distemper drinks from a puddle and then another animal drinks from that same puddle, they'll get distemper. Well, I just thought that was terrible speciesism. Again, letting animals suffer, because if that's some kind of horrible way of animal control by allowing them to die from distemper because they live really short, painful, horrible lives before they die with this disease. I guess there's no budget for it, even though the city wastes money on so much other crap. Just, the disappointment in the citizens of the city to think how many walking their dogs, parking their cars, driving by, walking by, because a lot of people walk their dogs in this alley, that nobody made the phone call. How can you not go back and check? I would be not be able to sleep, wondering what's going on with this animal. So, anyways, I guess that's the difference between vegans and everybody else. We're not perfect. I'm not perfect, but at least I helped this poor raccoon. This whole process between finding the raccoon, making the phone calls, and them showing up, this all happened within a span of like 15 to 20 minutes. It really was not a big deal. I guess the whole point of this story is, if you see an animal suffering, make a phone call, like do something. If you don't do anything, it's very, very bad karma. In my opinion, in allowing the suffering of this one creature, it's almost like allowing the suffering of every other creature. It's not going to get better with apathy. That's all I wanted to say. I feel better now. I feel like my throat chakra is balanced a little bit better now. And even though this raccoon's life could not be saved, it did bring me a little bit of comfort to know that instead of dying alone on the cold, hard concrete, at least it spent the last few hours of its life curled up on a warm blanket, protected from the elements.